your podcast sister, Lisa, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Happy New Year and welcome to the show. I wanted to first start out the podcast by thanking you, my listeners, for tuning in last year and making this podcast possible. And to all my talented musical guests, thank you for appearing on the show and sharing your stories behind the music. I'm looking forward to having many more singers, songwriters, and musicians on the podcast in 2025, featuring my new expanded video format. So now you'll be able to see and hear my interviews. On today's show, my podcast friend, Kaden Collins, the YouTube podcast host of the KGC show, will be joining me to talk music and more. And I thought it would be fitting to have Kaden start the new year off, as I was recently a guest on his podcast to talk about my background and podcasting journey. So stay tuned and let's talk music. Welcome, Kaden. Thank you for joining me on today's show.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for having me on, and you were a great guest a few weeks ago on my show, and so I'm honored that you'd asked me to be here on your show.
My pleasure. Kaden, this whole podcasting world is pretty crazy. You could talk to anyone from anywhere at any time, and you're calling from Spokane, Washington, and I'm in Cleveland, Ohio, and here we are, two podcasters uniting to talk music and more, and I really appreciate you being on the show. But why don't you kick it off and tell our listeners a little bit more about the KGC show?
Well, the KGC show came from a phone call that I got from a friend of mine by the name of Jeff Panzer. I had another podcast called the Spokane Man Podcast, and he called me one day and he said, "What's Spokane using you to pay you to use their name in your show?" And I said, "Nothing." And he says, "Well, you ought to think about making a name for yourself instead of making a name for the city." And I thought about it, and he says to me, "What are your initials?" And I said, "KGC." And he goes, "The KGC podcast, but eventually we'll drop the podcast." And I think I told him right then, I said, "What about the KGC show?" And he said, "Sure." And so it came from Jeff, but I started podcasting my grandmother passed away in February in 2020 of cancer. So I wanted to do something to honor her. And I felt like podcasting would be a great way to kind of branch out. And then I started getting into interviews by interviewing a guy by the name of Blind Joe. And then really after I interviewed Blind Joe, I started finding random people to talk to. And one day it led to me searching up Chris Golden's website and asking for an interview from Chris Golden. And shortly after that, that's when I met Jeff, and I did a podcast with Jeff, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and you're doing a fine job, and you've been doing this for quite some time now. You've interviewed some great names and musical talent. And why don't you share with us some of the talent that you've interviewed?
Well, Hot Boy Turk was an incredible episode that I was so blessed that I was able to do. Yourself, I enjoyed having you on the show. You made a great guest on the show.
Thank you.
George W. Martinez, Kate Staton, Dave Higbee. The list goes on and on. But I'm just so thankful for every guest that I've had on that show, and all of those guests make it special in their own way. So it's hard to pick a favorite. I love them all.
Yeah, and you had William Lee Golden from the Oak Ridge Boys on, and congratulations for that interview. I mean, he's a legend, 50 years in the music industry. And what was that like interviewing a legend and a singer that's, multi-platinum and, uh, it's a huge name. What was that like?
Well, interviewing William Lee Golden is probably the biggest honor I've ever had in my entire life. And I have a respect for William Lee that's more than just music. His words that he spoke on that show were just so powerful. You know, I can listen to William Lee talk for hours upon hours, and I can get something new out of everything he says. But it was my honor to interview him, and I've done it a couple times, and it doesn't feel like I'm interviewing a celebrity. It just feels that he is like an old friend. When I talk to William Lee, to me, he has that feeling about him to where, yeah, I know that his accolades and the Hall of Fame stuff is all there and everything. But to me, he's just William Lee Golden. He's just a legendary guy that I have in my life and in my corner, so to speak.
Now, I heard a story, and I want you to tell it because I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you at your graduation, and I have to tell our listeners, I mean, you're only 21 years old, and you have a lot of experience in podcasting for someone so young. But at your graduation, you got a special phone call, and why don't you tell us that story?
Well, I'll be glad to. Graduation day, June 11th, 222. 22. I remember walking around pacing up front of the building that I was going to be soon graduating upon. And I get this phone call and it says unknown. And I knew exactly who it was. And I answer it and I hear this voice on the other end. Hello. And it was Jeff Panzer again. And he called me this time with William Lee Golden to just say how proud they were of me. And to get that phone call from them on that day, it meant a lot to me because those are two guys in the, not let alone the music industry that people look up to, but personal impacts that they've had on my life. To get that phone call from the both of them meant the absolute world to me.
Jeffrey is so supportive of not only you, he's supportive of my endeavor with the podcast, and I know we both appreciate him. So while we're talking about music, let's talk about independent artists. How does your podcast help get the word out about independent artists? Uh,
Well, my podcast is not the biggest of platforms, but it's a platform for you to come share your voice. You know, independent music artists, I have a feeling in my head, and this might just be me, this just might be the crazy or the Spokane talking in me, but I feel like everybody has a shot of potential. Everyone has a shot. And it takes the right people to believe in you. And with the right people to believe in you comes the right team to also. And I think my podcast has had some pretty cool names on, but it's a way for independent artists to kind of get their music out in a newer way of getting it out these days, you know. You don't hear so much of radio interviews calling in. It's all video and podcasting now. So it's a new way for me to bring independent artists and give them a platform to shine their voice that everybody has. But I love getting to shine the light on those independent artists, so then that way they can find their correct person, and somebody watching out there might reach out to that person because I saw them on my show, you know.
well, that's terrific. And I'm looking forward to watching your guests in 2025 and see who you have coming on. And what's one of the favorite parts that you like about finding guests and booking them and Do you have anything that you really enjoy doing?
Getting to do what I'm doing here, getting to have a conversation and just let the artist be themselves. Before anything, it's important that you create a safe environment for that artist. And, you know, so you try to present the show the best way I can. And knowing me, I'm not really all the best of looking, but I make it work. And, you know, I love it because it makes me get to experience people's lives. They go into a lot of their detail, about growing up in their lives. And that's how I grow, is learning about other people. So,
Yeah. So it's a way of connecting, and you do a good job at that.
yeah.
Um, you know, making those that you're talking to feel comfortable. I know when I was on your show, I felt like I was just talking to a friend. And so while we're talking music, I have to ask you, who's your favorite band or artist?
Well, I like the Oak Ridge Boys. Those are the greatest groups to ever brace the field of music, is the Oaks. William Lee Golden and the Goldens, they're just as up there as the Oaks. But if we're talking about individual musicians independently, I'd have to say Danny Stefanetti. For me as a podcast host, I'd have to say Danny Stefanetti. And there's a reason behind that, because Danny Stefanetti is the biggest star I've seen ever. She can play the guitar like no other. She has the voice to go with it. She has the personality to go with it. When I interview Danny Stefanetti, it it provides that down home feeling that you were just talking about. It feels very comfortable. And I don't know if it's just her personality, or if it's just the connection that the two of us have together. But Danny Stefanetti is my all-time favorite musician, and I have favorites like Kate Staton and George W. Martinez and acts like that. But for for me, the artist who has had the most impact on my life is Danny Stefanetti.
Well, I'm sure she'll be happy to hear that. And as far as any songs or genres that you listen to on the radio, um, what's your go to?
I love country music. I love gospel music. I love rock and roll. I love a little bit of everything. And I love I love the melody. If I don't agree so much with the words, or so much the lyrical part of the song, I just like listening to the melodies and the beats of the songs. So I listen to everything. The song that's made the most impact on me as a person is "Time Has Made a Change in Me" by William Lee Golden.
That's
His verses on that song, it's incredible. It leaves me speechless.
that's wonderful. And I still love the Oak Ridge Boys, Elvira. I mean, and more, I'm even seeing on TikTok that song is being played on a lot of backgrounds for stories. It's one of those songs. It's timeless.
Yeah, Elvira is a great song, and I've loved getting to learn it over the years. And it's just one of those songs that you cannot listen to Elvira without smiling. It's very hard not to keep a straight face, because you just want to smile and let loose with your family when you hear that song.
It, absolutely, well said. So, Kaden, when I was doing some research for this interview, I read your life's journey, and it's a very encouraging one. And I was wondering if you would mind sharing with our listeners today your journey and how you've overcome some obstacles in your life.
I'll be glad to. I was born December the 23rd, 2003, in Seattle Children's Hospital. And that was a day that nobody in my family will forget because I'll make a long story short. I had some complications and I was very sick when I was a baby. And so much so that I died at 6 times, and the doctors were going to stop at 10. The doctors were going to stop trying to relive me at 10 tries. And what kept me, I knew God had a purpose for me, and I knew God, obviously, if you didn't let me die in that hospital room, I must have a purpose. Well, I think I'm fulfilling that purpose here today. But to get here from that day, December 23rd, 2003, to where I am present day, it took a lot of faith. It took a lot of courage from my family to believe in me. I can't forget where I'm coming from here. And that blog that you mentioned, thank you, Jack Yacht, for writing that. I have to give a very special shout out because she took the time to write it. But it was life or death that day. But my faith in God was stronger enough that day, and it's been strong for 21 years because of that day. And the obstacles I've come, I have water on my brain and, dead spots on there and suffer from autism and stuff like that. But those are minimal. Those are minimal to what I've accomplished here today. Those are, as rest in peace to the great Joe Bonzel, as he says, those are stepping stones to get me where I'm at here today. And yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think your message and your positivity is an important one, especially starting off the new year. And, you don't know who's watching this, and maybe somebody needs to hear those encouraging words and message you're talking about. And would you have any advice to give someone that might be struggling right now?
Don't give up. Look at my situation. You may not have to look at me specifically, but look at situations like mine, who basically were given an 0 and 11 shot at life, who were told basically, what's this guy doing? I've had doctors tell me that. What are you guys doing trying to save him? But you know what? Have faith. Don't look back. Jeff Panzer told me one time, he called me one time, and I was all, like a high school girl in the bathroom, I was all torn apart. And he called me one day, and he very humbly told me, he said, you can't look back on the hard times, because those hard times, paraphrasing here, kind of said, those hard times shouldn't you shouldn't live in those hard times. They should make you stronger and apply them to your life. So life is going to be filled with hard times. But the stronger your faith is, no matter who dies, if you know you have that faith and that you'll see him again, then everything will be okay. And I think my advice to you, faith will always outcome anything. So have that faith, because in your strongest of days, you're going to rely on that the most.
That's beautiful. And one of the things I like about you, Kaden, and when I'm talking to you, is you have a lot of wisdom for someone so young. And your future looks so bright, Kaden. And I can't wait to see how you continue to grow throughout your life. And it goes fast. I mean, I feel like I'm 21 some days, but I look in the mirror and then there you go. But anyway, um, thank you for sharing that. And let's talk about your goals or any projects you're working on for your podcast in 2025.
Mm-hmm. And gladly, my goal. We'll hit on that first. My goal is to let somebody know that you can do this. My goal for the podcast is to keep giving people with platforms, or keep giving people with a platform to share their work that they're most proud of. You talk about upcoming people on the show. Those come in daily. So we have some great guests lined up. I know for sure we have the great author Scott McCain coming back on. He's always a good friend. David Britt, who is he owns Spider Grip. So we're expanding our show, and we're going to be giving more people a shot. But we're also going to stay true to our values as well, independent artists as well. So this year, we're going to expand our show, but we're still trying to stay true to our roots. And we're going to make sure that 2025 is the best year for the show we've ever done.
Well, that's terrific. And how can our listeners tune in to the KGC show?
Well, they can go to YouTube. They can go to the KGC Show YouTube channel, or they can go to my website, thekgcshow.com. And I have to give a shout out to Braden Gritton for that. Braden Gritton, I went to middle school with Braden, and he called me one day, and he said, "Man, you're the most famous person I know in my phone." And I said, "You must not know the definition of famous, my friend." And after I said that, he said, "I would love to build a website for you." And I said, "Okay." And he did it, put it all together. And it was down the later part of the last year. It was just because we were reconstructing, but we're back up and running now. The KGC show is up. Got the merch there. Got some new merch coming out. And so we're just kgcshow.com is where you can keep up with us.
Okay, great. You're on social media.
Oh, yeah. Don't ask me to name all my handles, though. I can't do it.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast and kicking off the new year. And I look forward to having you back on the show.
I would be honored. Anytime that you need me, just call me. And I might also add, Lisa, thank you again for being on my show as well. What you have done for the music industry, independent artists like myself, you've helped give them a platform. So you are helping out the music industry as much as I am. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for having me on. And like I said, anytime you need me, just call me.
Same here, buddy. Well, thank you to all the listeners that are tuning in, and follow, and share podcast Sista as well as the KGC show. And I'll see everyone on the next episode, where I'll be interviewing a featured singer, songwriter, and musician. And we'll talk music and more. Well, I got to tell you, Kaden, like I always say, that's a wrap.
That's a wrap.